Hi, I'm Marilee Groves, youngest daughter, the one always seated at the edge of the table, if I was invited at all. At our family barbecue, my father looked straight at me and said, "You should feel lucky to even have a seat here." He didn't know I owned the table they were eating on. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just set my glass down, went home, and made a phone call. That night, my attorney uncovered something they thought they'd buried for good. They erased me from family photos. They used my inheritance to fund a wedding I wasn't invited to. They edited me out of the slideshow, but forgot I built the system running it. So, what happens when the quiet one flips the table instead of begging for a seat? Charleston doesn't ease you into anything. Not its heat, not its humidity, and certainly not the expectations of a family like mine. That Saturday afternoon, the kind of late summer day where even the shade felt heavy, the Bexley estate was buzzing. The backyard was already crowded with catered tables, hand-picked string lights dangling between crepe myrtles, and an open bar with more bourbon than sweet tea. Everyone who mattered, at least to my parents, was there. I arrived right on time. Not early, not late. I wore a light beige blouse, perfectly pressed, and navy slacks. Polished enough to be appropriate, subtle enough not to invite commentary. I had learned over the years to exist in the middle of everything and still remain just outside their frame. People said their hellos with smiles too wide and hugs too fast. I answered questions I hadn't been asked. No, I'm not married. Yes, work's good. Marketing. Small agency. I nodded, chuckled, and shifted my glass from one hand to the other just to keep from fidgeting. That was my job at these events, to exist in a way that didn't cause disruption. Walking toward the long seating chart propped up beside the fountain, I scanned the neat calligraphy for my name. Colton Bexley, Development Director, sat proudly at the center of the main table, flanked by Ophalie Wren, Public Relations, and Celeste Bexley, Host. I kept looking. Past Mr. and Mrs. Jacobs, past family friends, past the donors and the wives of business partners. Nothing. A passing staff member noticed me looking and gestured toward a folding table set near the garden gate. "Overflow guests are by the side table, miss." Overflow. That word stuck. Not extra or additional. Overflow, like something inconvenient you mop up. I made my way over, heels tapping the slate pathway. The table was smaller, set with the same linens, but none of the centerpieces. A group of younger guests sat there, cousins, someone's college friend, and a boy no older than 10 who squinted at me and asked, "Are you working the drinks table?" I smiled. "No, sweetheart. Just finding my seat." A voice floated in from behind me. "Don't be sensitive, darling," my mother said, effortlessly gliding past with a flute of champagne in one hand. "You're always late to RSVP." I wasn't. I had replied the day the invitation arrived. But facts never outweighed image with her. I sat down quietly, back straight, hands resting in my lap. From my position, I could see the main table, my siblings laughing with their spouses, Colton raising a glass as he recounted a deal he didn't close on his own, awfully pretending to laugh harder than she meant to. This was the script, and I was once again the extra who didn't get the revised lines. When the appetizers were cleared and the second round of cocktails had made the rounds, my father stood up from his seat at the head of a table. The noise softened. Conversations paused just enough for him to speak with casual authority. He raised his glass, the gesture alone silencing the few who still chatted. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," he began, voice calm and clipped. "It's not often we get to gather with so many faces that have been part of the Bexley story." He went on about legacy, about perseverance, about the importance of roots. I tuned most of it out. I'd heard this speech before. So many variations of it, always centered around the same idea, that our family's name meant something and we were all expected to uphold it, even if we weren't all acknowledged in the same way. And then, he looked directly at me. With a half smirk and the kind of tone people use when they think they're making a harmless joke, he said, "You should feel lucky to even have a seat here." I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I didn't even look around to see who else noticed. I just smiled. A slow, deliberate one. Then I reached for my wine glass, not to drink it, but to set it down gently, with precision, like I was finalizing a statement. No one said anything, but I felt the air shift. Laughter followed, some awkward, some forced. My mother leaned into awfully and whispered something I couldn't hear. Colton raised his eyebrows as if to say, just play along. I stayed seated, quiet, steady. In that moment, something ended. They didn't know it yet, but I did. After the last of the guests left, after the lanterns were turned off and the tables cleared, I walked back to my car. The air was cooler now, but I was burning. I drove the familiar route home with the windows halfway down, letting the night press in around me. By the time I stepped into my condo, clean, quiet, mine, I was done replaying it in my head. I kicked off my shoes, set my purse on the counter, and turned on the kitchen light. Before I could even pour a glass of water, my phone buzzed. Dorian Kessler. His name wasn't one I expected that late on a Saturday. "Marilee," he said when I picked up, voice low and serious. "I think it's time we talk. You're not going to like what I found." I leaned against the counter, staring at the bottle of water I hadn't yet opened. "I'm listening." I already knew it wasn't about my agency. Dorian didn't handle my business work. He handled one thing only, my personal matters, mostly the ones connected to the family. "Henrietta's file," he said. "I was going through it like you asked. The papers she left, there's more than what was originally filed." My fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. "What kind of more?" He hesitated, and that told me everything. "Marilee," he said again, voice softer now. "There's another will. It changes everything." I didn't speak. I didn't breathe. He continued, "You're not going to like what your father did with it, but we can fix this. You just have to decide how far you're willing to go." I closed my eyes. This wasn't about a seat anymore. It was about the table itself. The next morning, I stood barefoot in my kitchen, staring at the coffee machine like it might give me answers. The call from Dorian still echoed through me, quiet, calculated, the kind of message that made everything before it feel like a setup. I hadn't slept much. Instead, I'd sat on my balcony, looking out over the city's rooftops while memories circled like birds of prey. As if on cue, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door to find a courier holding a carefully wrapped parcel with gold lettering. The return label read, Celeste Bexley. My mother's handwriting. I signed for it, not saying much, and carried the box to the dining table. I didn't open it right away. I stared at it first, already suspecting the contents. It had that familiar weight to it, the kind that said, "We're pretending this is a gift, but really it's a performance." Inside was a leather-bound photo book titled The Bexley Legacy, a family history curated like a luxury brand catalog. The cover was embossed with our family crest, the spine elegant, the pages thick. I flipped it open, careful not to smudge the glossy paper. Page after page showcased smiling faces, Colton shaking hands at a groundbreaking ceremony, awfully at a charity gala, Amanda's engagement photo taken by the lake, mother looking timeless in tailored linen. I turned each page with growing detachment. I expected to be minimized, but I hadn't anticipated being omitted entirely. There were family group photos without me, snapshots of holidays, business events, backyard parties. No mention of me, not even a line of text. It was as if I had been airbrushed out of our history. I closed the book slowly, then reopened it to the index. No listing for my name. I typed out a short message to my mother. "My copy seems to be missing a few pages." Her reply came within minutes, breezy as a Charleston breeze in May. "Lighting wasn't great in your shots. Didn't want to include less than flattering images in the final print. Hope you understand." Of course I understood. I understood perfectly. The book sat on my coffee table for days, untouched. Every time I passed it, it caught my eye like a scab I refused to pick. I didn't need to reopen it. The point had already been made. 1 week later, I received an invitation to a community gala hosted at the Charleston Preservation Hall, another Bexley family staple. My attendance was expected, as always, but this time I brought a different energy. I wore a navy dress, understated, but this time I chose a shade that didn't blend into the backdrop. The room was packed with city council members, old money neighbors, and acquaintances who didn't know much about me except that I belonged to those Bexleys. There was a slideshow playing on loop titled The Year of the Bexleys. A large screen projected images of family events, charity drives, real estate milestones. I stood near the back of the room, a glass of ginger ale in hand. My photo flashed across the screen for a second, smiling, standing by the food table at last year's fundraiser. And then gone. The slide cut to Amanda holding champagne with her fiancé, Colton shaking hands, Celeste ribbon-cutting at the women's clinic wing she hadn't funded but certainly claimed. That 1-second frame of me felt like an error someone had quickly corrected. Later in the evening, I approached awfully by the dessert table. She was applying lip gloss with one hand and holding a champagne flute with the other. "Did the video get edited last minute?" I asked casually. She didn't look up. "It's not personal, merrily. These things are curated. You weren't really involved this year." "Curated?" I nodded, said nothing more, and walked away. Back at my condo, I set the photo book and a USB of a slideshow side by side on the kitchen counter. I placed one hand on each. A symbol, maybe. A ritual. They hadn't just forgotten me. They deliberately erased me. That realization didn't sting the way I expected it to. It was less a slap and more a settling, like watching a puzzle snap into place. I walked into my bedroom and pulled out the old shoebox where I kept personal letters, photos, and keepsakes. Things I never digitized, never risked losing to a cloud I didn't control. Inside was a folded note from Grandma Henrietta. I hadn't read it in a long time, but I remembered every word. "You don't need their applause to be real." She'd written that after my 5th grade spelling bee. I'd won, but nobody came to watch. Mom said it conflicted with one of Colton's playoff games. Awfully had a hair appointment. Dad, he rarely came to things that weren't about the company. Grandma showed up. Front row. Flowers in hand. She took me out for ice cream afterward and told me something that stuck. "You're not invisible. You're just in a room that refuses to look." That memory came flooding back now, stronger than shame, steadier than sadness. I was tired of being erased. But more than that, I was tired of pretending I wasn't aware of it. They hadn't won because they cut me out. They'd only exposed what they feared most, that I might step forward without asking for permission. So I poured myself a cup of mint tea, turned off the overhead lights, and sat by the window while the city pulsed below. They erased me, but they forgot. I still had one person who never did. By the following Monday, the air in Charleston had shifted. The sticky warmth hadn't left, but the weight it carried felt different, like the calm that comes not before a storm, but after you've decided to stop pretending it'll pass on its own. I had barely slept since the gala. Not from sadness, not even from anger, but from something clearer than either: focus. It started with an email. Subject line: cabin sale agreement, action required. Sender: Celeste Bexley. It was addressed to Bexley Family Estate Distribution List. I recognized the other names: Colton, awfully Amanda. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or sigh. Celeste's message was brief, polite in that polished way of hers that always made you feel like you were being handed a knife wrapped in a napkin. "Dearest all," it began. "We've received a favorable offer on the cabin in the mountains and feel this is a good time to consolidate assets. I've attached the preliminary agreement. Let's aim to finalize by Friday. The proceeds, of course, will be divided equally. Merrily, I believe you're still on the deed. Just a signature should do. Warmly, Celeste." The cabin. Henrietta's cabin. I clicked the attachment. The offer was insulting, less than 2/3 of what it was worth, even before the renovations. And they weren't consolidating assets. They were cashing in memories that didn't belong to them. What struck me most wasn't the greed. It was the assumption. They believed I'd sign. That I didn't know better. That I'd just nod and disappear again. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked over to my filing cabinet, second drawer, labeled Personal Legal. The deed was exactly where it had always been, tucked inside a plastic sleeve next to Henrietta's original letter to me. It was dated 4 months before she passed, notarized, witnessed by 2 of her friends from church. She had left the cabin to me solely. No shared ownership, no ambiguous language. Her handwriting, unmistakably hers, curled at the bottom of the note. "This is yours, sweetheart. They don't see it, but I do." I sat on the edge of my bed, the deed open across my knees, the words burning hotter than any summer heat. I didn't call. I didn't correct them. They didn't deserve my explanation. 3 days later, a cream-colored envelope arrived in the mail, addressed by hand. I knew what it was before I opened it. Amanda's wedding invitation. The cover of the card featured an artistically filtered photo of the cabin, bathed in golden hour light. A quote in cursive font read, "Join us at the heart of our family history." Inside, it listed the date, time, and location, all centered around the Lovell cabin. There was no mention of me, no line reading, "With gratitude to Merrily Groves." No acknowledgement that the venue existed because I had kept it alive, paid the property taxes, replaced the roof, arranged for snow removal in winters they never saw. I ran my hand over the embossed lettering. It was beautiful, professionally done, and utterly dishonest. That afternoon, I called Amanda. I didn't expect much, but I had to hear it from her. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Mar," she said, her voice bright, distracted. I could hear wind in the background, probably shopping or headed to a fitting. "I got your invite," I said plainly. There was a pause. "Oh, great. Did you like the design?" Mom picked the photo. "I recognized it," I said. "It's the cabin." "Yeah, well, it just felt right, you know. Everyone spent time there." "That's my point, Amanda." Another pause. Then, a voice that had shifted slightly, more measured, more careful. "Look, Mom said it'd be easier not to bother you, since you're not really into weddings." "I didn't know that was your call to make," I said, holding the edge of the invitation between my fingers. "Or hers." "Don't make this a thing," Amanda said, soft but firm. "It's just a location. It's just a location." I hung up without another word. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at my desk. I opened a spreadsheet I had labeled years ago, cabin expenses, 5 years tracking. Row by row, I filled in the cells. Property taxes, $21,800. Roof repair, $14,200. Plumbing overhaul, $8,700. Monthly maintenance, cleaning, pest control. Event insurance, firewood delivery, septic system inspection. Over $110,000. Paid from my personal account. No one asked. No one offered. No one noticed. It wasn't the money that haunted me. It was the ease with which they had taken what I had preserved and turned it into set dressing for their milestone. When I finished, I closed the file and leaned back in my chair. The lights were low, the sky outside dimming into twilight. I walked over to the small bookshelf where I kept a few framed photos and mementos. Nestled among them was a picture of Henrietta and me on the porch of the cabin, her arm around my shoulders, both of us wrapped in knit shawls, sipping tea. Next to it was a candle I hadn't lit in a long time. I struck a match and let it burn for a few seconds before tipping it to the wick. The flame flickered to life. "I'm still here, Grandma," I whispered. I remembered our last summer together, the morning she brewed her lavender tea and handed me a cup, her fingers brushing mine. "Don't give them what they won't return," she said. "Love, respect, or silence." I hadn't understood the last one then. Now I did. I picked up the invitation, walked it to the trash can, and dropped it inside. Then I smiled, not out of anger, not even from satisfaction, but from something sharper. Resolve. No more silence, Grandma. I promise. By the time the sun came up, I hadn't closed my eyes once. I wasn't tired. What I felt was something else entirely, like the sharp edge of clarity after the fog lifts. I'd spent the night at my kitchen table, papers laid out like chess pieces, Henrietta's note to my right, Dorian's voice still replaying in my mind. The next morning, I met Dorian at a quiet cafe off Church Street, one of those places that always smells like warm cinnamon and cedarwood. The air was heavy with coastal moisture, and I wore a navy cotton dress I didn't care about wrinkling. I wanted to blend into the background, not because I was hiding, but because I was listening, watching. He was already seated, a small brown box on the table between 2 mugs of untouched coffee. When I sat down, he didn't waste time. "It was in a sealed drawer," he said, sliding the box toward me. "Inside the original file your grandmother had stored with our firm. I didn't open it until I could confirm the chain of custody." I lifted the lid. There, nestled in tissue paper, was a stack of documents. A notarized copy of a supplemental will, dated 2 weeks before Henrietta passed. Signed. Witnessed. Filed, sort of. I scanned the opening paragraph. It was unmistakable. Henrietta had left me full ownership of the cabin, 8% of Bexley Holdings, and all her private journals. The language was direct, without ambiguity. She trusted you, Dorian said quietly. I nodded, still reading. He leaned back. Your father never filed this version. He submitted an older one that splits everything equally. I met his eyes. So what's the legal position? You're in the right, he said. This holds if challenged, but it will cause a fight. I'm not starting a war, I replied. I'm just done pretending I'm not in one. We didn't speak for a moment. The cafe had begun to fill with the gentle clatter of dishes and soft jazz. I folded the documents carefully and returned them to the box. As we stood to leave, Dorian added, There's something else at the bottom. That afternoon, I made the decision to visit my mother. I needed to see for myself just how far this had gone. Not in confrontation, yet, but in confirmation. When Celeste opened the door to her perfectly arranged house, she greeted me with a smile too rehearsed to mean anything real. Merrily, she said as though she were surprised. What a treat! She didn't ask why I was there, didn't mention the wedding or the cabin, or the fact that I'd been publicly scrubbed from every narrative they had curated. We had tea in the sunroom. I didn't drink much of mine. At one point, I excused myself to use the bathroom. On my way back, I passed the guest room, the one awfully always used when visiting from Atlanta. The door was cracked open. Something inside caught my eye. Sitting atop the vanity was a silver hair comb, ornate and unmistakable. Henrietta's. She'd promised it to me on my 30th birthday. Said it had been her mother's before hers. Said she wanted me to have it because I would appreciate things with history. I stepped into the room and looked at it for a moment. I didn't touch it. From behind me, my mother's voice drifted in like the tale of perfume. Oh, that? Awfully's using it for Amanda's bridal portraits, she said. Don't worry, honey. It looks better on her. She's always had the more delicate features. I turned to her. Her expression was warm, familiar, weaponized. I smiled. Of course. The visit ended 15 minutes later with a side hug and a promise to see each other soon. When I got back to my condo, I didn't cry. I didn't pour a drink. I didn't call anyone to vent. Instead, I opened the folder again and reread the will, line by line, highlighting the parts that proved what I now knew in my bones. Every omission, every erasure, every polite insult was planned. It was never negligence. It was strategy. They knew I was supposed to inherit. That's why they erased me. I took a sharpie from my drawer and wrote in bold letters on the file. To be activated. The next morning, I unpacked the final contents of the box Dorian had given me. Beneath the documents, wrapped in soft velvet, was a smaller envelope with my name handwritten across the front in Henrietta's looping cursive. No wax seal. No dramatics. Just ink faded by time in a thin, confident fold. On the back, in smaller print, for when the silence gets too loud. I waited until evening to read it. I made a cup of tea, lavender, just like she used to, and sat on the couch, legs folded beneath me. The note wasn't long. Merrily, I know what they'll try to take from you, and they'll be clever. They won't steal it all at once. They'll chip away, smiling while they do it. You'll be called difficult, ungrateful, emotional. But I want you to remember this. You don't need to take back the table. Build your own. But let them know you're not afraid to flip theirs. Love always. Henrietta. I folded the letter slowly, pressed it against my heart, and then I put it away. That night I didn't sleep. I wrote. I planned. And by morning, I was no longer hoping they'd see me. I was making sure they'd feel me. The dawn after that sleepless night didn't greet me gently. I hadn't even noticed the first hint of light slipping through the blinds. My kitchen table was still covered in notes, copies of legal documents, highlighters uncapped and drying, Henrietta's final letter sitting in the center like a compass. I packed everything up in a neat folder, tied my hair back, changed into a dark gray pantsuit I usually reserved for client presentations, and called Dorian. He didn't ask questions, just told me to meet him at his office within the hour. By the time I walked into that quiet, glass-paneled space on East Bay Street, the city outside was just beginning to hum. Inside, it was all calm tones and quiet efficiency. Dorian waved me in, already waiting with his laptop open and 2 mugs of coffee, black, no cream, just how we both took it when serious work was involved. He didn't ask how I was. That wasn't necessary anymore. "Merrily," he said, sliding the laptop slightly to the side. "I went through the documents again last night. You're already listed as administrator on 3 of the 5 trust branches. Technically, you've had sign-off access for years." I blinked. "And nobody noticed?" He shrugged. "They saw your name on things, but they didn't read close enough. They assumed it was for record-keeping. I think your father underestimated how much he handed you just to avoid managing the details." I leaned back slowly in the chair. Then let's give them something they never expected. That afternoon, I returned home, dropped my bag by the door, and went straight to the office nook where my old laptop sat plugged in. I hadn't used it in a while, the one I brought to family meetings, loaded with trust accounting software, archived correspondence, and records they never bothered backing up. I logged into the shared family drive, the one I helped build when Celeste wanted a more modern solution for document transparency. Funny word, transparency. Inside a forgotten subfolder titled Correspondence, Archive, buried under older versions of budget proposals and asset reports, I found it. Subject: Reducing Entitlement Exposure. The email was from my father, sent to the in-house attorney at Bexley Holdings nearly 2 years ago. The body of the message was short, to the point, and as cold as anything I'd ever read. "Merrily isn't reliable. Too emotional. Remove her from the trust discussions. Quietly. Don't provoke. Just replace." I read it twice. Then again. My chest didn't tighten the way I thought it would. It was more like something inside me settled, hardened. I forwarded the email to my encrypted archive, adding 1 sentence to the top of the forwarded thread. "This is where legacy ends." I sat back, let the weight of that settle. That evening, I made dinner for myself, roasted chicken, a salad, something simple. I watched a rerun of an old courtroom show without really following it. I just needed the noise. Then, around 10 o'clock, I opened the administrative portal for the trust accounts. I didn't blow anything up, didn't delete files. That's not how any of this would work. What I did was far quieter, cleaner. I toggled off discretionary spending for the secondary fund that Celeste used to run her women's foundation. That card would decline the next time she tried to buy floral centerpieces for a gala. I froze the travel expense account Colton used for business development, which, more often than not, meant brunches and happy hours with potential investors he never converted. I paused activity on Amanda's wedding reimbursement line. It wasn't critical. It just made a point. They wouldn't get alerts. Not yet. Not until they tried to swipe. When I was done, I logged out, cleared my browser, and sat quietly, watching the cursor blink as if it was waiting for more. There was nothing left to say. Not to them. The next morning, I woke early, brewed coffee, and opened the shared family calendar. It was another one of those things I had set up, years ago, to streamline communication across our far-flung network of family members and financial teams. I scrolled to the recurring meeting labeled Family Trust Review Monthly. I clicked Edit. Changed the title to Family Recalibration, TBA. Saved. Synced. Closed. By lunchtime, Celeste had tried to purchase a designer dress from a boutique in Mount Pleasant and called the shop, then the bank, confused. Colton had messaged the family group chat, mild annoyance masked as humor. Weird glitch with the card. Anyone else seeing this? I didn't answer. Dorian called me that evening. Did you touch the funds? I paused access, I said. Temporarily. He chuckled. You've done more damage with a single login than most lawsuits do in 6 months. I haven't drawn blood, I replied. Not yet. You will. There was no malice in his voice, just certainty. I ended the call and stood by the window. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. Below, couples strolled, cars passed, life continued. I wasn't planning to destroy them. I was planning to make sure they could never rebuild themselves on my silence again. I hadn't drawn blood yet, but they knew. I wasn't bleeding anymore either. 2 days after freezing the accounts, I received an email invitation to the family's quarterly trust review. The kind of calendar entry that usually arrived automatically, but this time had a distinctly clipped tone. The subject line simply read, "Quarterly Financial Overview, Mandatory Attendance." I knew what it was. A performance. A way to regain control of the narrative, to reestablish the old order under the polite veil of spreadsheets and boardroom etiquette. And I also knew I wasn't walking in as the same merrily they were used to. The meeting was held over Zoom, the Bexley way of doing things ever since the pandemic. On screen, Harlan in his home office, stone-faced behind mahogany bookshelves, Celeste perched in her sunroom, face powdered, pearls gleaming, Colton looking like he had just rolled out of bed but trying too hard to act casual, Amanda muted, video off. Awfully somewhere in Atlanta, sipping an oat milk latte with her camera tilted just high enough to show her designer blazer but not her eyes. As the host, Harlan kicked things off in his usual monotone. We'll keep this brief. Updates from the trust administrators, performance overviews, and proposed reallocations. It was always the same structure. Safe, controlled, circular. But this time, Colton shared his screen. A chart appeared, colorful bars and percentage allocations across accounts. At the bottom, where the names of beneficiaries were always listed, there were 5 now. Not 6. My name was gone. I let it sit for a beat. Then I unmuted myself. I'm not seeing my allocation line. Colton, never good at hiding discomfort, cleared his throat. Right. So, we discussed it last quarter. You've been less involved. We thought it was just practical to clean things up a bit. Clean it up, I repeated, voice steady. Right, he said again, fumbling with words. Not permanent, just streamlining. So, I said slowly, you remove me from something I legally co-own? Silence. Even Celeste looked up from whatever she was fake writing on her notepad. I smiled too calmly. Noted. Then I muted myself again. They didn't know what I'd already filed, or that the silence they mistook for surrender was actually alignment. Of paperwork, of attorneys, of leverage. 2 days later, the headline hit the Charleston Business Gazette. Bexley Eco Tower Project to be rebranded under new Sustainability Foundation. The press release was carefully crafted. It referenced internal strategic shifts and a new vision for environmental responsibility. What it didn't say was that I had legally withdrawn my name and my inherited stake from the project. And with it, I had enforced a clause that Henrietta had written into the estate's name usage rights years before. Any use of Bexley in public-facing ventures required unanimous consent from all heirs. Without mine, they had to pull it down. The fallout was instant. One investor emailed Dorian, asking if the foundation had dissolved. A board member from the city's Historic Preservation Society left a message with my office assistant. What's happening over there? Do I need to re-review my commitment? I didn't respond. I didn't have to. That afternoon, Harlan received a formal letter from my legal team. Not dramatic, just precise. It listed in order my ownership of the Level cabin, my authority over 3 trust entities, my control of the digital infrastructure, the family archive, the shared calendar, the automated approval systems. At the bottom, a single line. No further warnings will be issued. I didn't need to threaten them. I simply documented what was already true. Back at the Bexley house, I imagined the scene without needing to witness it. Celeste would be pacing, fingers tapping against her phone case like she was texting someone more important than she actually was. Colton would be yelling, probably something like, "She's just trying to tear everything down," while failing to admit he hadn't read a single financial clause in over a year. Amanda would be scrolling Instagram, wondering if she could still use the cabin for her engagement shoot. And Harlan, for the first time, I knew he'd be quiet. Not because he was strategizing, but because he finally realized he wasn't in charge of the rules anymore. That evening, I ordered Thai takeout, opened a bottle of Pinot Noir, and watched a rerun of a cooking show where nothing was at stake. There was something comforting in the rhythm of chopping, sautéing, plating, simple steps that yielded results. When my phone buzzed, it was a text from Amanda. "Hey, can we talk? Dad's freaking out." I didn't answer. Another came 10 minutes later. This one from Awfully. "You've made your point. You can stop now." That made me laugh out loud, short, Sharp, honest. Because no, I hadn't made my point. Not yet. Later that night, I walked over to the bookshelf where I kept Henrietta's journals. I didn't open them, just ran my fingers along the spines. The name meant everything to them. I only had to take mine back to bring theirs down. By Thursday evening, the tension in our town was visible, even in the air. People were talking. Quietly, of course. Charleston had its own way of gossiping. Garden parties, gallery openings, charity events where the real conversation happened in glances and raised eyebrows, not words. So when the Bexley family hosted a restoration and vision gala at a local art gallery, I knew exactly what it was: damage control. The Eco Tower project had been rebranded. The Bexley name was off the door. Investors were nervous. Donors were asking questions. And Celeste, she was orchestrating a performance. The gallery buzzed with chatter and soft jazz. Waiters weaved through guests with champagne flutes and stuffed mushrooms. I arrived on time, dressed in black, simple, tailored, unassuming but unmissable. I didn't announce myself. I didn't need to. Just being there was enough. Colton stood by the open bar, arms folded, forcing laughter with a group of junior execs who probably didn't realize they were props. Celeste drifted from group to group like a well-trained politician, all air kisses and gentle touches on the forearm. Amanda posed for photos near a centerpiece designed to resemble a miniature version of a cabin, my cabin. Halfway through the evening, Celeste tapped her glass for attention. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began, her voice warm and sure. "This has been a trying time for our family, but also a chance to reflect and refocus." She gestured toward Colton, who smiled like a man who hadn't seen the inside of a spreadsheet in 2 years. "And we are so grateful to Colton," she continued, "for stepping up and leading our transition through this legal shift with such grace and intelligence." Applause followed. I remained still. Behind me, a woman leaned toward her husband and whispered, "Wasn't she the one who handled the trust issue?" I didn't turn. I didn't need to. Celeste raised her glass again. "Let's toast to the next chapter. Stronger than before." Later, I walked past her on my way to the coat check. "Marilee," she said, grabbing my arm gently, smile frozen in place. "I hope you understand we had to highlight Colton tonight." "I understand exactly what you're doing," I replied calmly. "And I'm not here for acknowledgement. I'm here so you know I see it." She blinked, just once, then let go of my arm. The next morning, my phone rang before 8 a.m. It was Amanda. Her voice was sharp, panicked. "Marilee, have you seen the email from Gregory's mother?" "No," I said, slipping on a robe and heading to the kitchen. "She's calling off the engagement dinner. Says the family is reconsidering. They saw the press, and your legal name is all over the ownership records. They think we're misrepresenting assets. They're calling it fraud." I waited. "I need you to fix this," she snapped. "You need me to fix the consequences of you using something that was never yours." Celeste's voice cut through the background, shrill and shaking. "You've ruined everything. Your spite is poison. I didn't raise mine. You built a castle on someone else's land. You're just mad the deed came due." I hung up, not out of anger, out of finality. That afternoon, the Charleston Current published an anonymous exposé. The headline read, "The Forgotten Daughter of Charleston's First Family." It detailed the years I managed the trust's logistics, the silent responsibilities I carried, the erasure I endured. No one claimed authorship, but I knew the source. Celeste called within an hour. "You need to issue a statement." "No," I replied. "It's damaging the family's reputation." I paused. "Which family?" She didn't answer. That night, I found a voicemail waiting. Her voice had softened. "Come to dinner. Let's fix this. We're still family." I stared at my phone for a long moment before opening my laptop. I pulled up the shared family calendar, the same one I'd renamed weeks ago. Then I drafted an email and sent it to the whole family. Subject, family dinner. Message: "You taught me silence was grace, but I've learned, sometimes, grace is knowing when not to come." I closed the lid. They thought the shame would scare me. What they didn't know was, shame was how I survived them. The morning after, the one following my unsent reply to Celeste, the one I drafted at 1:14 a.m. with fingers shaking and eyes burning, I sat by the window, coffee in hand, and watched the neighborhood start its daily choreography. The familiar rhythm played out like it always did. Leash dogs pulling eager humans, sprinklers arching across neat lawns, someone hauling a trash can back to the side yard. Normal things. Ordinary life. But beneath that glossy veneer, I knew what was beginning to bubble. Somewhere, maybe in that white colonial on the corner, or the Tudor with the tulips, someone was already whispering. Did you hear what she did? But I wasn't whispering anymore. I didn't finish the email to Celeste. I didn't send it. Didn't need to. Some truths don't belong in polite conversation. Some truths need fire. And I had fire. That day, I finished what I had quietly begun months ago. The folder, labeled innocuously as if needed, was now full to the brim, and every file was a matchstick. There were transaction logs, trust reports, internal memos with edits that revealed more than they concealed. Even a PDF export of Harlan's email, the one where he delicately suggested I be quietly transitioned out of the board's public-facing initiatives. That phrase, quietly transitioned, like I was furniture being moved to storage. They thought I wouldn't notice, thought I'd fold. But I didn't fold. I archived, and at exactly 12:04 p.m., I uploaded the folder to a secure drop server, encrypted, clean, traceable only to a ghost account created with a burner identity. I pressed send. Recipients: 2 local newspapers with a history of holding powerful people to account. 1 national outlet with a taste for legacy scandals. 3 institutional investors who had bet big on Bexley Holdings and would not be amused by the rot beneath the polish. I didn't write a message to accompany the files. I didn't need to. The documents were the message. Then I turned off my phone. I didn't pace. I didn't panic. I walked to the farmer's market, bought myself fresh lilies, paused to smell every single bloom at the florist's stall, came home, put the flowers in Henrietta's old crystal vase, rearranged the bookshelf in the study, color-coded the spines, alphabetized the biographies, lit a candle, because while they were scrambling, spinning, screaming, I was reclaiming space, time, myself. That evening, when I powered my phone back on, it was as if a fault line had shifted beneath the entire family empire. 17 voicemails, 43 text messages, 8 missed calls, 16 emails. From Celeste. What did you do? From Colton. You've crossed a line. From Amanda. Why are you trying to ruin us? I didn't reply to any of them. But I did answer when Dorian called. Colton's stepping down, he said, not wasting a single breath. Effective immediately. Emergency board session tomorrow. Legal's panicking. I sipped my tea. Let the steam warm my cheek. That's not my problem anymore. He says you made this personal, Dorian added, his voice taut. Of course he does, I said. It always feels personal when the truth you've buried finally digs itself out. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean, sharp, present. The next morning, I stood behind a podium at the Charleston Public Library, the same building where I once volunteered as a teenager, where I used to shelve books and sneak poems between pages of fiction. The press conference had been planned for weeks, originally just a modest announcement about the Henrietta Lovell Foundation's next phase. Nothing flashy. A paragraph in the local paper, maybe. But the room that morning, full. Cameras, microphones, journalists crammed in shoulder to shoulder, curious locals in the back, holding their phones like shields. I wore a black suit, tailored, no jewelry, just a small silver pin, a lavender sprig on my lapel. I stepped up and adjusted the mic. I'm proud to announce, I said, voice steady, that the Henrietta Lovell Foundation will be offering full scholarships to first-generation college-bound women, especially those who have spent years supporting others quietly, invisibly, just as Henrietta supported me when I needed it most. And then I closed with a line that had been with me since the night I found the letter, a line that had waited in my chest like a vow. Some inherit chairs at the table. Others build their own from splinters. I stepped back. No one from my family was there. Celeste, I was told, had watched from home, probably with a glass of Chardonnay and a list of rebuttals she'd never get to use. Harlan had refused to comment. Amanda had left the invite unanswered. But the applause came. Not loud or self-congratulatory. Just a slow, rising wave, earned, not orchestrated, from people who recognized what had been burned down and what was now being built in its place. Afterward, as the stage crew wound cords and packed lights, a young assistant handed me a small envelope left at the edge of the stage. No name, no seal. Inside was a crisp printout of Henrietta's letter to me, the one I'd read in private years ago. But this time, it was retyped on foundation letterhead. The trim around the page was lilac, faint, elegant. At the bottom, handwritten in neat script, "You're not forgotten." That night, the speech went viral. A local blogger dubbed me Charleston's quiet hurricane. Someone on Twitter wrote, "She's not the forgotten daughter. She's the one who remembered herself." But none of that mattered. I wasn't looking for praise. I was looking for peace. Before bed, I returned to my desk, opened my laptop, read through the backlog of messages I'd been dodging. Celeste had sent another. "You should have talked to me. We could have made this right, quietly." There it was again. Quietly. The word they always use when they want you to stay small, stay polite, stay invisible. I opened a draft, typed a reply, thought carefully about every sentence. Then I hovered over send, and deleted it. Instead, I opened the document that held my speech and added a final line just for me. No more whispered apologies behind closed doors. If it can't be said in the light, I don't want to hear it. I shut the laptop, turned off the lamp, let the silence in like an old friend. Justice doesn't always arrive in courtrooms. Sometimes she walks out the front door and locks it behind her. Thanksgiving came and went with barely a whisper. No phone call, no late-night check-in, no group chat where someone pretended to care enough to ask, "What are we all bringing this year?" Not even a pity invite. Instead, Amanda posted a carousel of glossy snapshots to social media, filtered just enough to look casual, but curated down to the last flicker of firelight. A smiling couple toasted red wine beside a crackling hearth. A turkey, suspiciously perfect, presided over a mahogany table like a crown jewel. In one photo, Celeste stood just behind Amanda, a manicured hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Her smile was flawless, hollow, practiced, the kind of smile that comes with a lifetime of knowing exactly when to perform it. I wasn't tagged, wasn't named. Not even a passive "wish you could have made it" slipped into the caption like a stray olive pit in a salad. But for once, I didn't feel left out. I didn't feel anything, really. Not numb, not bitter, just still. Celeste did send a message, though. Eventually. 3 words. Sterile, efficient, surgical in their detachment. "Hope you're well." I read it standing at the stove, wooden spoon turning slow circles through the simmering soup. I didn't answer, didn't delete it either. Just closed the screen and let the message float into the background noise of my life like all the other unspoken things we trained ourselves to ignore. I didn't know her the choreography of pretending. The following weekend, I drove up to the cabin. First time back since the foundation launch. I thought the distance might make the place feel different somehow, smaller maybe, or like it belonged to someone else now. But the moment I turned off the main road and onto the winding gravel path that cut through the pines, the air shifted. Crisper, cooler. The trees wore their late autumn palette, burnt golds and deep ambers, with a few stubborn holdouts clinging to green like they hadn't yet made peace with change. I parked beside the old oak where Henrietta once strung bird feeders, and the silence settled around me like a blanket. No voices, no agenda, just the woods, the wind, and the crunch of gravel underfoot as I made my way toward the porch with my overnight bag slung over one shoulder. But something was off, different. Someone was already there. Harlan. He sat at the edge of the dock, knees bent, hands clasped, his gaze fixed on the lake like he was trying to read something written on the surface. I hadn't seen him in months, not since the documents went public, not since the board forced Colton's resignation, not since Harlan's name stopped holding doors open in polite company. I didn't call out, just walked, slow and deliberate, each step echoing with memories we both probably wished had aged better. When I reached the dock, I stopped a few feet behind him. The wind rippled the lake in lazy waves. Ducks glided in the distance. Somewhere a woodpecker tapped a rhythm into a trunk. "I didn't expect to see you here," I said. Harlan didn't flinch, didn't even turn, just nodded slightly, eyes still on the water like it held the answer to a question he was too tired to ask. "I built everything around that name," he said, his voice low. "Thought legacy meant carving something permanent. Turns out it's just branding. A pretty box for people to forget you in." We stood like that for a long while. No need to fill the silence with excuses. The lake lapped gently at the dock. A single leaf drifted past, its crimson edge curling into itself like a secret. Eventually, he stood. His movements were slower than I remembered, less force, more weight. Or maybe I was just finally seeing the toll. When he turned to face me, there was no apology in his eyes. No grand confession. Just a hollowness that wasn't quite regret, but carried the outline of it. "You reminded me it's about the story," he said. I forgot who I was writing it for." And then he walked past me, hands shoved into coat pockets, footsteps crunching on the gravel as he disappeared back toward the road. I didn't follow, didn't stop him. That part of the story was already written. Inside the cabin, I lit the fireplace and unpacked groceries into Henrietta's old kitchen, the one she called her sanctuary. The shelves still held the chipped blue mugs she'd sworn made tea taste better. I boiled water, steeped a handful of lavender and rosemary from the herbal blend I'd recreated with a local botanist, and let the scent wrap itself around the air like memory. The living room looked different now. Warmer. Lived in. Above the fireplace, photos lined the mantel, portraits of the first round of Henrietta Lovell Foundation scholars. Young women in caps and gowns, eyes bright with defiance and hope. One smiled while standing beside her mother. Another clutched her diploma with both hands like it weighed more than anything she'd ever carried, and maybe it did. In the center sat a photograph I'd found in the attic, tucked between old yearbooks and press leaves. Me, age 8, cross-legged on the porch steps, reading a novel nearly half my size. Henrietta's arm around my shoulders, both of us looking straight into the camera. Unapologetic. Present. No one had cropped me out this time. That night, I curled into the old sofa, wrapped in one of Henrietta's faded quilts, and opened my journal. The pages weren't filled with strategy or court filings anymore. No more dissecting wounds like they needed classification. I let the pen move without force. Some wounds don't fade, not because they fester, but because they mark where love lived loudest. I closed the book and watched the fire burn low, flickering like breath. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for an invitation. Not for forgiveness. Not for a seat at a table built by people who had already decided I didn't belong. Morning came soft and gray. I made breakfast. Eggs, toast, and spiced apple slices. Tidied the kitchen. Washed the mug. Packed up slowly. No rush. Before I left, I stood in the center of the room one last time, taking in the wood grain, the quiet, the warmth that hadn't come from the fire alone. I turned the key in the door, not to shut it away, not to escape, but because now it was mine. Not inherited, not tolerated, chosen. I didn't get my seat. I claimed the table. Sometimes, the hardest battles aren't fought in courtrooms or boardrooms, but around family dinner tables, with silence as the only weapon. This wasn't just a revenge story. It was about reclaiming dignity, rewriting legacy, and choosing self-respect over approval. Have you ever been erased from your own story, or felt like the outsider in your own family? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And if this resonated with you, don't forget to like